This information is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute as financial or investment advice. It does not consider your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether this information is appropriate for your circumstances and consult a licensed financial advisor before making any decisions. And Kris Chand, welcome to the Graduate Dentist Podcast.
Thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Because I'm very excited to have you on because recently, and in addition to the podcasts that I typically record with, which are with dentists from all different stages of their career, whether it be a new grad, experienced dentist, or educator, I've also been really wanting to kind of do a deep dive into the people that support us as dentists and help us, continue to have flourishing careers who we might not necessarily think of immediately. And we were just saying off recording that as dentists, we leave dental school understanding dentistry, but we kind of don't necessarily understand all the other aspects of adulting. And you come out and people are like, oh, you need a accountant, or you need a mortgage broker, or an insurance broker, or a financial advisor, or like a lawyer, or this, that, and the other. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who are all these people and where do I begin? And so I've been very fortunate to have met yourself and for you to have helped guide me throughout my early years of dentistry. But I really wanted to introduce you to our audience to share your expertise. And so perhaps for those that don't know you, can you give us a rundown of who you are and what you do day to day, Kris?
Absolutely, Erica. Thank you for that. My name's Kris Chand. I'm a financial advisor with Sherrin Partners Financial Advisers. We're an advice firm located, well, our head office is in Brisbane, but we've got offices all throughout Australia. And as a financial advisor, I basically help partner with my clients to help them achieve their financial goals and objectives. And I'm a holistic advisor, so I specialize in the financial planning side, the wealth side, but also on the insurance side as well. So that personal protection piece, which I think is what we're probably going to focus our discussions on today. And my day to day really involves meeting with clients, understanding what their needs are, what are their goals and objectives, what's important to them, and helping them to ensure that that they're on the right path and well on their way to achieving what they want to, as well as ensuring that, I suppose, from the insurance perspective, any unforeseen events relating to their health doesn't disrupt their ability to achieve those goals and objectives. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I specialize in advice to medical professionals, so dentists and doctors make up the majority of my clients. I would say that 80% of my clients are probably dentists. And I service clients completely Australian wide. So no matter where you are in Australia.
Which is really helpful. And it was similar to our previous episode that we recorded with Jason Savage about, buying your first home, is that, JS Medical and Dental Finance works specifically with, dental and medical professionals. And so it's nice talking to someone who just understands your field and understands the specifics and the nuances of what it is to be a dentist in terms of your income, but also your, like, I guess all those little details which someone who isn't familiar with that field may not get. It's the same with accountants and lawyers as well, particularly with the contracts and the arrangements for a dentist. So you're kind of all across that board. Hey, Kris.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right. There are a lot of nuances and intricacies and things related to your industry that is important to understand. A key thing is understanding the way your employment is often structured with SFAs and contract work, and a lot of people being self-employed, and how that can feed into the insurance piece is really important because often you don't have the safety net of having sick leave or annual leave or anything like that to fall back on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were right. We were saying that specifically for this episode, Kris, we really want to dive into that insurance piece because it's something that I feel like is no one tells you about. And if I didn't have like my older brother who's my like a senior dentist who's been there and done that and tell me, oh, you should go look into income protection, I would have had no idea what that is and why I need it and what's so important about it. And I find so many of my colleagues in the same boat, and so many young dentists who are like, what is that? Like, why do I need it? And I'm so glad that I got it early on. And we're going to go through, I guess, this episode just sharing the details of it, what it is, why it's important. I think we've both got a lot of stories to share as well that we've heard of people that, haven't done it when they should have. But I really wanted to make sure that for this episode, we make no assumptions, that we keep it really simple, start from the very beginning, because I think that's the scary thing for a lot of young dentists is they don't know what they don't know, whether it is in dentistry or whether it comes to the financial side of things. And it's much like when we see our patients, like they come in and they're just like, oh, but my tooth's not sore. Why do I need to do that? Or I'll wait till it becomes a problem before I intervene. And I'm sure insurance is more or less that same kind of concept of, actually we should start earlier when it's not a problem before waiting until it is and it's too late. For someone who's looking into, I guess, like this income protection, is it always through the route of a financial advisor? Is that how people acquire it, or how does that work?
Specifically for income protection, no. So there are certainly options outside of talking to someone like myself, a financial advisor, to obtain that type of protection. You can also deal with insurance brokers, I suppose. So personal insurance brokers will do that, and they sort of limit their expertise to just the insurance piece. There are some people who don't provide I guess, advice in terms of the insurance, and they treat it as just offering you different options and say, here you go, you pick and go with whatever you feel is appropriate for your needs. And that's under the umbrella of general advice. And usually it has fewer compliance obligations. There's less regulation around that. And so a lot of people focus on that area because there's less compliance and less requirements for them to be able to ensure that the client's needs are met. And I guess also less repercussions if they set them up with the wrong thing or the inappropriate policy. The other option is for people to go direct to the insurance companies as well. Now, not all insurance companies on the Australian market that we have as advisors or insurance brokers have access to make their offerings available directly to the public, but certainly there are a handful out there that do. I would always just advise a bit of a word of caution there. I know some people do go down that route, but there can often be a lot of fine print associated with those types of policies. And as you just mentioned, you don't know what you don't know. And you don't really understand the differences between policies, products, and providers unless you've spent the time researching all of that fine print and things like which one's going to protect you if you can't work as a dentist versus one that's requiring you to not be able to work in any suitable occupation, for example, or which one's going to include things like needle stick injury and occupationally acquired hepatitis and HIV cover versus ones that won't. What are things like the benefit period or waiting period, and what is the impact of having different options on that front? So I think in this space, especially for my medical professionals, having someone with expertise in your field, understands your industry, but has that specific product knowledge is absolutely essential. You're paying money for these insurance products, be it income protection or anything else. You're setting up this safety net, which you need to actually provide that benefit for when you need it the most. So when something happens to your health and you need to have that benefit actually pay out, there's nothing worse than then going to the insurance company and then saying, hang on, and pointing to some clause or fine print in the policy, which then doesn't provide the benefit that you thought you had, and leaves you in a really difficult or challenging situation.
Yeah, and I feel like your explanation there was just really case in point because a lot of what you said just went over my head. but but I think that's exactly it, right? Like all those considerations to you, which are just like second nature. You understand these products inside out. You know what is suitable for your clients. Whereas for us, it's just like I wouldn't know where to begin. I don't know what I need. So, that's why you go to those specific experts for that guidance and for that advice. Kris, forgive me if this is like a bit blunt then, but I've had friends who then come to me and they're just like, oh, but then don't I have to pay a lot of money for a financial advisor? And don't they charge me for every minute that I speak to them? Is that true? Or how does that work?
Great question, Erica. Look, every financial advisor is different in terms of the way they charge or the way they structure their fees. I suppose for me personally, and I'll focus on the way I do things for my clients, is that with insurance specifically, and it can be different on the financial planning piece, but certainly with insurance specifically, we are allowed to collect commissions similar to what a mortgage broker or someone else like that would collect on the insurance that is set up. Now, under Australian legislation, the amount of commissions we receive is regulated, and in fact, by default, all insurance providers pay the same commissions. So it, at least from my perspective, it has no bearing on who I recommend to my clients. But I, provide advice to dentists day in, day out. So I have a pretty good understanding of which providers are going to be most suitable for them, and which ones are going to meet their needs in times of trouble. So because we're able to collect commissions on those insurance products, then I'm often happy and willing to waive any upfront fees to the client directly, and allow the commissions from the insurance policies to pay for the services that we're providing. And from an insurance perspective, usually there's an upfront fee associated as well as an ongoing fee. And again, the commissions are normally, you get an upfront commission and an ongoing commission. And for me, if I've got a new client who comes to me and they don't have any income protection, for example, I will waive any initial advice fees and say, look, as long as we go ahead with the cover and everything goes smoothly, and we're all acting in good faith, we'll absolutely waive any fees associated with that. And then when you come on board as a client, we provide that ongoing service in relation to their cover, reviewing the policies every year, making any adjustments, providing administrative assistance, updating address, payment details, all of that sort of stuff, so that they don't have to be on hold with the insurance company. In fact, they never even have to talk to the insurance company if they don't want to, and do everything through us. And I guess most importantly, if anything ever happens in terms of their health, and I tell all my clients this, we're here to support you through that claims process as well. And having an advisor that knows what they are doing and being able to deal with the insurer and keep them accountable at that time is so very important. Having an advisor with claims experience is absolutely worth their weight in gold. And the studies show it greatly increases your ability to get a successful benefit paid if you have an advisor working with you through that period. So the way I structure things for my clients, Erica, there's no upfront fee and there's typically no ongoing fee either. And we're here to support you through that entire process, but we do get commissions from the insurance companies that reimburses us for those services.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Kris. And I really appreciate just that transparency. And I wanted to get it just right off the bat, out of the way, address the elephant in the room, because I know a lot of people, whenever it comes to just anything financially related, everyone's a little bit just like paranoid or a little bit skeptical about who do I listen to and, what is the fine print. But I think we've just really set the conversation up so that, blank slate, we know that, okay, we'll go to a financial advisor who has expertise in this field, who understands the dental industry through and through, knows who all these insurance providers and who are going to be the best people that can meet and look after our specific needs, but also knowing that you're here to look after us, right? And much like how when we talk to our mortgage broker, it's like you're working for us, not specifically a company, and you're going to find what works best for our needs. We're not necessarily paying you, but you're here to look after us. And then as your form of remuneration is that, okay, you'll get a commission from the provider, but it's obviously whatever we've worked out as being best suited for our needs. Let's then dive into specifically when we talk about insurance, right? What does that entail, and what are the different categories, and what are we looking at here? What do we need as a young dentist, a young working professional?
Okay, so I'll start by just broadly outlining the four key types of personal insurances. As a young professional, a new graduate, you won't necessarily need all of them from the get-go, but there's certainly at least a couple of them that you probably want to think about. But just to give you a quick overview of the four types, the first one, and for me, I always start with this one because it's the most important for most people throughout most of their lives, is your income protection insurance. Now, that's a type of insurance that pays a monthly benefit in the event that something happens to you and you're unable to work. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat in that you have to be unable to work beyond a certain period of time, and that's called a waiting period on the policy. And for most of my dentists, I try and set them up with as short a waiting period as possible. Although, there are options to increase that waiting period. Typically, the shorter the waiting period, the more protection that is provided by the policy. But obviously, there's a higher cost usually associated with that as well. And so that monthly benefit will then be paid to you until the point where you're able to return to work and start seeing patients again. Or in the case of a, um, a more serious situation, or something more catastrophic in terms of your health, it will continue to pay that monthly benefit until the end of the benefit period on the policy. So whatever the benefit period is stipulated on that policy, that's when those benefits will end. And again, I tend to encourage most of my clients to have a benefit period of to age 65. So that gives you peace of mind of knowing that in case of something really significant happening health wise, you're going to get that ongoing monthly income stream for the entirety of your expected working life. So really important. Now, I haven't touched on all the nuances there, but that gives you a broad outline of income protection. I'll quickly just move to the other three, and we can certainly circle back to discussing income protection in more depth. Uh, the the next one, which I think is somewhat important, is called total and permanent disablement cover. It's called TPD for short, and that pays a lump sum benefit in the event of you being deemed totally and permanently disabled. So what that means is that the medical opinion is that you will never again be able to work in your chosen field. Now, I do say chosen field because that's the type of TPD cover that I normally recommend. It's occupation specific, but there are TPD policies out there that are not specific to someone's occupation. So they're called any occupation TPD policies. And normally, when you have TPD through your super fund, it's going to be an any occupation TPD policy. So that's something that people don't often realize. They think that they've got total and permanent disablement cover, and not realizing that it's not going to pay out just because they can't work as a dentist. It's actually if they can't work in any suitable occupation, which is a far wider um, definition. It's casts a much wider net, and it's a much more challenging definition to successfully get a benefit paid out under. Whereas with the own occupation definition, if you cannot work ever again as a dentist, that will pay a benefit.
I see. So it's better because if you went with everything, then it'd be hard to justify that. Oh, even though you can't work in the dentist, what's to say that you can't work as a consultant or something? So they might not pay you the benefit. Is that right?
Exactly, or as a teacher, or
Yeah.
doing some other sort of
Yeah.
administrative role. And what they look at is
Mm-hmm.
your when they determine what's a suitable occupation, they look at what you might be capable of doing based on education, training, or experience. And so, if you've worked in some other industry, or if you've been educated in some other role, and it's very easy for dentists to make that transition into something like teaching, for example, and many do. So as you can imagine, even though you can't work clinically on the tools because of your injury or illness, um, but most insurers will then say, well, hang on, you can still go and do something else that you're capable of doing, and therefore we're not going to pay you that lump sum benefit with total and permanent disability. I guess moving on from that, the final two that I'll just touch on, one is called trauma insurance, also known as critical illness cover. This again pays a lump sum benefit. It covers you in the event of diagnosis with a serious health event, and that's why I prefer the term critical illness. So if you get diagnosed with a serious critical illness, it will pay out a benefit tax-free. This is a type of policy that cannot be offered through superannuation. It's only outside of super that you can hold this cover, and it normally protects you against about 40 or 50 different medical conditions that might arise throughout the course of your lifetime. The big ones that we see a lot of claims for are things like cancers, cardiovascular illnesses like heart attacks, strokes, neurological conditions, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, loss of hearing, loss of sight, loss of limbs. There's, as I said, 40 odd different conditions that are covered. And this one has got nothing to do with your ability to work or not work. As soon as you get diagnosed with any one of these 40 events, we just provide that medical evidence to the insurer and you receive that benefit tax-free straight into your bank account. So whilst that's something that a lot of people think about a little bit later on in life, maybe after they've been working for a few years, or once they've got the capacity financially to add that to their risk protection portfolio, because trauma cover, when you've heard the types of things that I've said, it protects you against things like cancers and other issues. They can be quite common at some point to have something like that diagnosed over the course of most people's lives. And as a result, it is a little bit more expensive than the other types of lump sum insurances. So, that's why some people don't get it straight away as a new grad. But it's something that I think is really important at some point, because if you did get diagnosed with a serious health event, it's nice to know that you've got this lump sum amount of money that's going to be paid to you to help you deal with the medical and treatment costs that might be associated. Ensure you can see the specialist that you want to see, be treated privately if you need to, and look after yourself without having to sell down assets or pull money out of other places, borrow money from family. So it just makes that going through something like that much easier, at least from a financial perspective. The final one, number 4, is very straightforward. So I kept that one for last. Life insurance, or sometimes also called death cover, which obviously is just a lump sum that gets paid out. Yeah, not to you. That's about your loved ones that you might be leaving behind. And it's just a lump sum benefit in the event of your passing away. And that's something that I would say that people in the early stages of their life don't necessarily require, because they may not have any dependents, they may not have a spouse, they may not have any debt. But certainly once you do have people relying on you, you have dependents, you have children, then life insurance starts to become more important. So, without getting too into the weeds, there is another reason why you may consider life insurance earlier on, but that's purely from a structuring perspective to try and get some efficiencies with regards to portfolio pricing. But I won't get too involved in that for our discussions today. I'd say that when you're considering what you need when you're starting out, you're really thinking income protection, possibly TPD, and then you might think about adding trauma and life insurance down the track when it becomes appropriate.
In a profession like dentistry, people don't always realize just how physically taxing it can be. One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in my career was simple: protect yourself, especially whilst we're young, fit and healthy, because you never know what might happen. It's easy to think we're young and invincible, but I've heard way too many stories, from sporting mishaps, back spasms, hand and shoulder injuries. I've even heard of someone sneezing and putting their back out. And just like that, you could be out of work for months. That's why things like income protection, trauma cover, or total and permanent disability insurance are so important. It's about having that extra layer of security and peace of mind, knowing that you have a backup plan in case something were to ever stop you from working. And I couldn't have asked for anyone better than Kris Chand at Sherrin Partners to look after me. Kris has been my personal insurance broker and financial advisor since I was a new grad, and I'm genuinely so grateful for all the time he spends getting to know me and my goals. Kris and his team specialize in financial planning specifically for healthcare professionals, so they understand the unique challenges of our industry. That way, we can focus on what we do best, looking after our patients whilst they help secure our financial future and protect arguably our greatest asset, ourselves. A big thank you to Sherrin Partners for always looking after me and for supporting the Graduate Dentist podcast. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a excellent breakdown. I'm so grateful that you've gone through that, Kris, because I remember being a new grad coming to yourself and I'm saying, what do I need, Kris? All these terms just so overwhelming. They go over my head. Like, do I need all of them? What do I need? And I think your breakdown keeps it very simple. And you're just like, okay, I think everyone needs that level of income protection. But the other things is very much dependent on your scenario. And the beauty of having a conversation with a financial advisor is actually talking through your specifics, because everyone's a little bit different, whether they how old you may be. We might all be new grads, but everyone graduates at a different stage of their life. So whether you've got a family, whether you have kids, whether your parents are working or not, whether there is and people to look after you if something unfortunate happened to yourself, are you that the main, I guess, like income provider of the family? So there are so many just intricacies and nuances that affect what you may or may not need. But coming back
Absolutely.
to, I guess, primarily for our audience being students and new grads, where we say the later three may not necessarily be appropriate for the majority of our audience members at this point in time. The first one of income protection is so important. And we hear so often, so many, like, young dentists will apply that same kind of just thought process of like, oh, but I'm young and healthy, like I'll be fine. But if anything, that's kind of the reason why you need to do it, because you are young and healthy. Is that right, Kris?
100%, Erica. You've hit the nail on the head there. And we're all
Hmm.
superhuman. We're all bulletproof when we're young, and we things haven't started to go wrong with our health. Um, but yes, and especially for dentists, in this profession where um, it is quite physically demanding. It can be taxing physically and also mentally sometimes, and it requires a lot of manual dexterity and fine motor skills. And so, any little thing that goes wrong physically with your health, it can have a profound impact on your ability to actually work as a clinician. And so, some people don't realize that they need this protection until things have started to go wrong. They've been working as a graduate for a year, and maybe they haven't got the right chair, they haven't got loops, or they haven't just been taught great posture and the appropriate techniques. And next thing you know, they're starting to get neck pain, they're starting to get back pain, they're getting wrist pain. As soon as those things have started to happen, you're starting to see doctors, you're getting x-rays and things like that done. All of a sudden it's going to get challenging to get the insurance that you want to have, especially getting it without terms and loadings put on the policy, which can often mean that the insurance company won't cover you for certain things, which is obviously not ideal. You want to be fully protected, and the best way to ensure that is to make sure that you get the cover before anything starts to go wrong. And for a dentist, as soon as you start working and you've got a bit of cash flow coming in that you can get that income protection in place, that's the time to do it.
Let's break that down even like more specifically. Hey, Kris, say it's like in your first year, and let's just say, let's throw out a number and say you earn 100,000. That's is how much you earn, and can you protect that entire amount? And given that you're happy, you're healthy, is that how it works?
Unfortunately, no. It would be good if the policy replaced the entirety of what you earn, but the policies don't work like that. The current policies that are available on the Australian market will replace a maximum of 70% of your average monthly income. typically. Okay, so if you're earning 100,000 per year, you'll actually only get 70,000 per year, but it'll be broken up into monthly benefits. And that's the maximum that they'll be able to cover you for. Some policies are a little bit lower. Some may have what they call booster benefits and things like that, where you might get a higher amount for a certain period of time. But generally speaking, the maximum income replacement that you're going to get is 70%. It's still there as a valuable safety net, but I guess the way insurance works is it's not designed to put you in the same position that you were in where you're able to work. It's really just there as additional protection, that financial safety net, and they don't want to disincentivize people to try and recover and obviously return to work as well. So that's the other reason why it's not going to be 100% replacement.
Oh, absolutely. And then say you move into your second year or like your third year, and let's just say your income doubles, right? Would you need to therefore up your level of cover then to reflect that? Otherwise, it would still be covering that 75% of the 100,000 from your first year. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, 70%. But yes, you're right. So
Oh, 70.
um,
Sorry. Yes. Me
that's
trying to
okay.
push it there. Yeah. Yeah.
um, Look, yes, I would suspect, especially early on, typically you want your income protection to try and somewhat keep pace with your earnings growth, which can be quite significant in your early years of starting to work as a dentist. Now, I always put a little caveat in that you don't necessarily need to insure your income to the maximum extent. That's not necessarily the requirement. It's more about ensuring that if something was to go wrong, that you would be able to meet your expenses, your living and lifestyle needs without having to make too many compromises and sacrifices. And obviously, your any liabilities that you have can comfortably be met without putting undue financial stress on you. So if an income protection benefit of $7,000 a month or $8,000 a month allows you to do that and still comfortably meet your expense requirements, then you don't necessarily have to increase it to $15,000 or $20,000 a month, even if your earnings allow you to. Um, and the other thing that does happen in most policies automatically is you do get a little bit of a small bump up in your benefit every year at the anniversary based on CPI. So typically there'll be an indexation applied to your policy benefit anyway. But in my experience, that indexation doesn't keep up with the earnings growth that most dentists see in those first few years of their career. So it is necessary to try and increase that income protection benefit, particularly early on, until they get to a level that's comfortable and they know that that's going to give them the protection that they need.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a really good point there, Chris, where you said, well, it depends on what your monthly expenses are. Because if you've got relatively little expenses, you don't have dependents on you, you're not trying to pay off a mortgage or something like that, you may not necessarily need that full on cover. And I think that was a really good reminder as well. It's like the goal is not to be reliant on it, and the goal is to get back to work, but it's just so that you're not completely at a loss, which we hear so many stories, and I've heard it myself, Chris, where it's just like young grads and very early on they like have a back injury or they have a hand injury and now they've had to take a whole month off of work, but they've got absolutely nothing. And so I think the bottom line is something is probably better than nothing, but it also depends on what your situation is, what expenses you have to pay off on a monthly basis, and what is a wise amount so that you can ensure that you're not putting further pressure on like the people that are around you or any dependents and yourself, right?
100%. And I think what this
Yeah.
comes back to, Erica, both
Mm.
what you just said then, and I think you alluded to it earlier in this conversation too, this is why I think personal advice with professionals that understand your industry, the way you work, the way you produce income, and who know the product is so important. So getting that personalized insurance um, can really save you money where you know that your income is a certain amount, but you don't need that much cover for one thing, but also ensure that the amount of cover is appropriate to your needs and factors in things like dependents, mortgage repayments, any other expense requirements that you might have. Whereas when you are going direct, for example, to the insurer, you don't have the ability to understand those concepts or even work out exactly how much is going to be appropriate should something go wrong. And that's something, because we do that day in, day out, we understand exactly how to work out, okay, what's an appropriate amount of cover, knowing that if something goes wrong with your health, there could be additional expenses associated with that. Or having that discussion about what are your financial needs ongoing. There are some young grads out there who are looking after their parents or sending money overseas, and things like that happens quite a bit. And they say, look, I want to make sure that that can continue if I can't work as well. So my income protection has to not just meet what I need while I'm here, but I want to be able to continue to provide that support to my parents. And so, we have to ensure that we can factor that into.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about like going more into detail about like industry specific requirements. We mentioned before that, yeah, this is the thing that we say like dentistry is a like almost insidiously physically taxing career. My brother and I often joke that like our parents were I guess like laborers. Like they all their life my parents like used to work in the factory. They recently just sold their grocery store, but they worked with their hands a lot. And I remember growing up, like our parents used to tell my brother and I, like, you know what, like you need to be this. We're gonna send you guys to school so you can be well educated, and so that when you grow up you can work with your brain and not have to work with your hands like we do. And we're like, sure, mum and dad, we're going to study really hard so that we can work with our brain. And then you graduate as dentist, you're like, hang on a second, as you're sweating through an extraction, or if you're like turned yourself into a pretzel, and you're like, which part of not working with our hands and it was this part? But there is a kind of the things that I'm sure you hear day in day out, right, Kris? And I wanted to ask, like, what were the most common, I guess, injuries people develop that you hear about? I mean, what percentage do you think like that a dentist during the I guess lifetime of their career might experience one of those injuries? Like, would you have an idea about that?
Well, I don't have um, concrete studies to confirm this, but anecdotally, based on my experience, anything to do with the back and neck, and I would argue that across the course of a dentist's career, there's a 50% chance of that potentially being a claim at some point in time, relating to the back and neck. The other thing I see a lot of claims for hand and wrist injuries, very common. So they're the things that are usually the first to start presenting as complaints from a health perspective, but B, they're also the things that the insurance companies take extremely seriously. So it's an immediate red flag if they hear that you've had one consult with the doctor. In fact, I've had an occasion where a client applied for income protection insurance, and they said, "Oh yeah, I had a stiff neck for a couple of days because I'd slept a little bit wrongly and my pillow wasn't great, and I sort of had a stiff neck. I didn't take any days off work. I kept working, and then that resolved because the recency of that event. It was sort of 3 months before they were applying for their income protection policy. When they applied for the income protection policy, the insurer put a cervical spine exclusion on their policy. Now, with exclusions, they can be reviewed and eventually taken off um, someone's cover, but it's certainly not ideal to um, you know find that in your profession that you have any sort of exclusions regarding your back and neck, and all of a sudden, if something was to go wrong for that period of time that exclusion is sitting on your policy, you're not going to be covered. And so, yeah, the other one that I've had again just recently, this is a new grad who's been working for a couple of years now, and she unfortunately has been thinking about getting income protection, but has not made the decision to get it until now. When I was speaking to her, she revealed to me that she's had some lower back problems come up of late, and she started to get some investigations done. and she's talked to a doctor who's referred her to get an MRI. And so the way she explained it to me was her partner was actually also a medical doctor, and he got a hold of the MRI results before, she got the official results back. And he said, "Oh, I think there might be something here going on." And so she's obviously started to, um, I won't say panic, but she's started to realize the urgency of making sure she's protected. And then she's called me up and said, "Hey, I just want to quickly get this income protection in place before I get diagnosed with anything officially, and before there's anything actually discovered." Unfortunately, I had to give her the bad news that it's already too late. You don't need an official diagnosis. As soon as you've gone and talked to the doctor, that's already recorded against your medical history. And even though the investigations are still underway and nothing's been diagnosed, the insurance company will not even offer her cover until the investigations are completed and there's some clarity on exactly what's going on, why it's happening, and what is the treatment and management plan moving forward for her condition. They will want that information in order to be able to properly assess the risk of taking her on as a client. And until that's done, they won't provide any insurance whatsoever. So I sort of had to explain that to her, and she was a little bit disappointed. And then I also had to explain that inevitably, now that this has already transpired, when we do apply for income protection insurance for you, there is definitely going to be a lower back exclusion. Okay. And depending on what that MRI shows, if it's showing something structural, if there's a bulging disc, or if there's something else going on, it could be quite challenging to get that exclusion taken off your policy in the future. If it's very short term, I mentioned that someone who slept wrong in the neck, and if it's just a muscular problem that's going to get better pretty quickly, then yeah, very easy to review and get that taken off in time. But for something structural, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, and they're very thorough with it as well, Chris. Like, I'm so glad that because I'm so glad that I had you kind of talking me through it, because once we start applying for it, you then get like an interview with, what would you say, like what do I call them? Like, you get interviewed. Yeah. And I remember you saying to me, I'm just like, this is one of the times where you kind of have to be mindful what you say and just don't yap too much because leave no stone unturned. And I remember when I did my interview, they'd ask like, "Oh, have you seen the doctors or anything?" And like, I'm happy to be quite transparent about this, but it's like I had a mole excised, and they're like, "Oh, tell me more about that. What did you do?
Yes,
Who
yes,
did you see? When was it taken away? How many reviews did you have? How big was it?" And I was just like, whoa, like really in detail for something that I hadn't even thought of and hadn't even thought was worth like even mentioning, or like needed that they would go into detail, but they really leave no stone unturned and really go into it. So it kind of makes sense when you have someone that example of that new grad with the lower back pain, how even though they hadn't gotten a formal diagnosis, the fact that they'd just gone to see a doctor for it and had scans, I was like, that's going to be dug up so quickly, right?
yeah, absolutely. So that process that you went through is called the tele interview process, and that's part of the underwriting. And the every person who applies for insurance has to go through that process, and that's the way the insurer assesses whether or not they want to provide you with insurance, because they with these retail policies, which is different to things in super, once you get this cover and it's there, they can never take it away from you as long as you keep paying your premiums. That cover is called guaranteed renewable, which means they will never be able to change the terms. They'll never be able to take it away from you. They won't, even if your health deteriorates quite significantly, or you start taking up some risky activity, you start smoking a pack a day cigarettes, your policy is still exactly the same as what it was when you weren't doing those things. So um, that's why insurers take it really seriously, because they have this one opportunity to underwrite their risk and assess how much risk is associated with taking you on. So um, little things that you say that you don't think is going to have a material impact on your health, they have to really look into it and drill down and find out to the extent of which that may affect your health in the future. And that's what they're trying to do when they're asking all those questions. Sort of understand why, especially one given
Absolutely.
one side note, Erica, which I haven't mentioned, is that dentists and probably hand in hand medical doctors as well, but dentists claim more on their income protection than almost any other profession in Australia. So, with those sort of stats, it's not surprising that the insurers are trying to lift every stone and leave no stone unturned, as you said, when they're looking into your medical history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as, healthcare professionals ourselves, where, as I said, there are so many parallels to when we look after our patients and we see them and we do a thorough risk assessment to see, like, I'm going to do a crown for you, but is it going to last? How often do you brush your teeth? Like, how often do you floss? Like, do you grind your teeth? Like, we do that same kind of risk assessment because we want to know that whatever work we do for you is going to last. But if you're got red flags here and there of someone who's not going to be able to maintain whatever it is that we've provided for you, like we want to make sure that our bases are covered as well. So it's not hard to understand where these insurance providers are coming from because they're also doing that same risk assessment of us as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing on that
Yeah.
point
Mm,
too is that um,
mm,
some people might be tempted to maybe not tell them everything that's been going on, but the 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 thing is, you always run the risk of that coming back to bite you. Once something is recorded against your medical history, it's typically there, and you know, insurers have a way of finding that information. The worst thing that can happen is that you take out this cover, maybe haven't been completely transparent with what's happened in terms of your health, and then you go to claim and then have your claim denied at that point in time because they've realized that you weren't completely honest about something that happened. And especially where it's a pre-existing condition that is now that you had at the time of application, and that's now what has caused the claimable event. If that's discovered when it's time to claim, you won't be getting paid. And in fact, you run the risk of having your insurance cancelled as well in that scenario. So, things that are they're gonna be appearing on your Medicare history, on your private health statements and things like that. They can um, insurers can access those records down the track if they deem that it's necessary. So that's something to keep in mind.
mm. But it's also at the end of the day, I guess the benefits of having this is it's peace of mind, isn't it, Chris? Because I remembered being in my first year, and oftentimes, like, I'd find out these stories through all the people and the guests that I'd interview. But I was shocked by how many stories I'd heard of senior dentists who weren't even necessarily all that old. They'd be, quite early on in their careers, and like they'd have a back spasm out of nowhere. And it's easy for us to think, oh, but it was probably because they do risky activities, or it's because of sports that they play, or they don't go to the gym, or whatever it is. But I had a friend who said, one day I sneezed and my back just spasmed. And after she told me that, I was terrified of sneezing too aggressively because I was like, I'm going to do my back. But or like but there's so many. Like I've got some of my bosses who they've moved into just practice ownership and stepped away clinically because they've had a shoulder injury that's meant that they can't work anymore, or other people with lower back injuries. And you hear those stories and you're like, oh, thank goodness that you have income protection or you have insurance where you're not just left completely just unable to work but also not have any form of income. But then on the flip side, I also hear so many stories, I was telling you before, of just like young dentists, like a new grad that I know who started having like trigger thumb or issues with her on her dominant hand, and she's only 6 months into working, but she's like, oh, now I need to go get like injections, and now I need to go get scans, and now I have to take a few days off of work, but she's got no income protection. And you're like, that's so unfortunate, sad, but that's not gonna get covered now, right? And so it kind of comes back to what we were saying, like whilst you're young and healthy and you haven't got any conditions on you, it's the best time to be getting this. But at least you have that peace of mind and have that just reassurance that you can sneeze and you'll be okay, right? And you can go
Absolutely.
play the sports that you need.
And without trying to bring you know,
Mm,
the mood down too much, it's not even just your health that can impact the cover. So you may recall, Erica, when you applied for cover, they asked you about family medical history, and they want to know what's happened to family members, your parents and siblings and things like that. And that can definitely have an impact on your cover. In fact, it seems more and more common that I'm encountering where um, when we're applying for certain things, cancer is a good one. If there's a diagnosis with a family member at a particularly young age, then all of a sudden there's a potential exclusion on your policy for that same condition. Okay, so that's something we're seeing happen more and more. Um, Generally speaking, if something happens later in life and your parents are diagnosed after they're 60, it's probably less likely to be an issue. But if it's younger than that, then all of a sudden things like cancer diagnoses and heart attacks and all those things can start to have an impact on any insurance that you apply for as well.
yeah, because it's that genetic component as well, hey? Yeah. One thing I mentioned just briefly, and I wanted to see, like, does it have an impact? Well, I guess one of the considerations before we talked about, having like whether you have that, well, I guess just building on that family history or whether you have dependence and whatnot, but also depends on your lifestyle as well. And so, do you feel like there are specifics, or are there certain exclusions, or like, I'm just wondering whether there's anything that people might miss depending on like their lifestyle, whether it's like extreme sports that they partake in, or you mentioned before like smoking, or just any other lifestyle factors that people may not realize may have an impact on their policies.
100%. So your lifestyle matters. Usually there's quite a wide range. Let's start with one thing is BMI. They will check your height and weight, and they'll ask you what your BMI is. Once you get beyond a certain BMI, they will decline cover. Now that's usually quite a high number. I think it's around 35 from memory for most insurers, but there's a little bit of variance. But typically, once you get to those higher ends, then they might start putting loadings on your cover, which is where they charge you a higher premium than what you otherwise would pay. Similarly with smoking, there's what's called smokers rates, which is again a loading that gets applied to the policy, where if you've smoked at any point in the last 12 months, they normally say if you haven't smoked in the last 12 months, then you can be treated as a non-smoker. But at any point in the last 12 months, then you will get smokers rates. And again, there'll be loadings applied to your cover. But other things as well. I've seen free diving exclusion applied to policies. A client did semi-competitive mountain bike riding on the weekend, and that was excluded. Scuba diving is a common one. So they will ask you about not just your health, but also about those lifestyle and pastimes. So any sort of risky pastimes can be excluded. I had one client who was doing competitive taekwondo, and straight away you can imagine the risk of injury with that sort of sport is quite high, and the insurance companies do not want to cover you for that. So if you're doing things at a competitive level or even semi regularly that's not competitive, then potentially the insurers can consider that risk and look to exclude that activity from the policy. Generally speaking, if you're just doing things once in a while recreationally or as a way of staying healthy, that includes riding a bike or doing some martial arts and doing some sort of regular exercise. I know some people who do boxing training, and once in a while they might just do some light sparring, but they don't actually get into a ring in official fights or anything like that. That was deemed okay. So if you're just doing what's considered regular activity for good physical health and recreation, that would be fine.
Absolutely. I feel like we've unpacked so much in this episode, Chris, and I'm really grateful for you being just so open and accommodating for all my millions of questions. But I really wanted to make sure that we left no stone unturned. We really covered everything from like top to bottom, all the questions that I often get from new grads as well, who just have no idea whether they need it or not, whether it's important or not, the process of it. And I feel like we kind of talked everyone through just like what it is, the different types of insurance, who you speak to, what are the factors they consider, that process of like, the tele interview, what things you should say, what things you should be mindful of. And then also the other considerations in terms of like your own medical health, your family health, your lifestyle. So I feel like this was such a such a just information jam-packed episode. So I think it was really great. I wanted to ask you, Kris, just whether you have any like final pieces of advice for young dentists and new grads. And often I frame this question through the lens of, obviously you have a lot of clients that you speak to day in, day out. And every so often, I'm sure there's something that just leaves an impact or leaves a mark for you. You've shared a few stories so far, but I wanted to know if you had any other just like final thoughts and pieces of advice that you think would be beneficial for our young audience to listen and be mindful of.
Absolutely, Erica. So, if there's a couple of takeaways that I can provide to your listeners, one would be I can't overstate how important it is to get personalized professional advice in this space. There are so many different types of insurance policies now, so many different providers. The difference between income protection policies from provider to provider can be quite extreme in the current market. And in fact, the vast majority of income protection policies that are available will not provide occupation specific protection all the way through to that age 65 benefit period. Okay. A lot of the policies that are available, and in fact, most of those ones where, you're applying directly or you're not getting personalized advice, will actually only cover you as a dentist for maybe 2 years or roughly around 2 years. And then after 2 years, what they'll do is they'll change the definition and they'll say, okay, we used an own occupation definition for the first 2 years and you've been paid out. Now we're going to change the definition to an any occupation definition. And what that means is now even though you can't work as a dentist, if you can go and work in some capacity in a different suitable occupation, you will cease to receive that benefit any further beyond that period of time. And that's a major concern for my dentists. And so it's really important that when you are looking at policies, you're trying to get one that's going to be occupation specific all the way through for the entire benefit period. Really, really important. And things like having that occupationally acquired hepatitis and HIV and needle stick injury protection as well is super important as well. So yeah, get that professional advice, make sure the person understands your situation and needs really well and sets you up with the right policy that's suitable for your profession as a medical clinician.
Absolutely. I love it. And I myself am so grateful to have met you and to have you look after me and to provide, specific advice for myself. That's really let me feel like I've started my career on the right foot and also have that peace of mind to know that I can work comfortably and know that you've got that behind you to look after you. And it's kind of what we need as dentists. There are enough things that stress us out on a day-to-day basis when it comes to looking after patients and, all the demands of that the last thing we need is to worry about whether our health and our physical well-being is also going to be a factor and an impact. So yeah, really important. And I'm really glad that we got to share this message with the rest of our audience. So thank you so much for your time today, Kris.
Absolute pleasure, Erica. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Graduate Dentist Podcast. I really hope you've taken something valuable away from this episode and that you feel heard, you feel seen, inspired, and optimistic about our journey as graduate dentists. As I always say, we're in it together, so let's spread the word, let's share the love, send this to your friends, your colleagues, and those who are on a similar path who you feel may benefit from being part of the community. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so send me a message, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time for another episode.